Algebra 1, Section 1, 2, we're solving equations by addition and subtraction. So, when we're adding things, for example, 4 and negative 2/3 plus 4 1/3. Now remember, when dealing with fractions, we have to make sure the same denominator. This is, luckily we have the same denominator. So this would equal 4, okay, and then negative 2 plus 1 over 3. So because there's no whole numbers, 4 stays the same. Negative 2 plus 1 gives me negative 1 over 3. So this, I can write it like this, or I can also write it, I put the negative over here. So the negative can go anywhere. If there's a negative, and there's a negative in the whole thing. So negative 4 1/3. This next one is negative 0.51. So that means on the timeline, this is just a reminder of how we work with negatives. On a timeline, negative 0.51 is here, right? And what this means is I have to go positive 0.29. So I have to go this way, 0.29. So if I want to do that, then I'm not going to reach 0 yet, right? Because I have to go positive 0.51 at least in order to reach 0. So I haven't hit the positive. So I'm going to end up with negative 2. So 0.51, negative 0.51, and then that means it leads me to negative 0.22. Now, this might be more practice for some of you, so if that doesn't make so much more sense, there's other videos that might be able to help you understand positive or negatives. It's very important that you understand the whole positive and negatives, because not understanding it will get you frustrated in some of the problems. So number 2, before we move on to 2 to 6, it's very important. This we were just simplifying, but these ones we're going to be solving, okay? The opposite, it says number 2 is giving the opposite. The opposite is basically, if this is a positive 8, the opposite would be negative 8. And if this is negative 2 over 3, the opposite would be positive 2 over 3. Okay? But starting from 3 to 6, there's a rule that you have to know, and it's all about balancing equations. Okay? What you do on one side, do to the other. That's going to be your chant throughout this whole chapter. What you do on one side, you have to do to the other. Okay? We're going to solve for these problems down here. In order for you to solve, okay, we have to isolate the letter, but we can't change the value. Let's go to number 3, and then I'll explain what I mean. So, this is similar to what we did in the last section. We're just going to plug in. If A is 3, so we're going to do 3 plus 5. This gives us 8. Okay? And B is negative 2, so 12 minus negative 2. So 12 minus negative 2, when you have two negatives put together, that's positive. So we have 12 plus 2, which gives us 14. Right? That's an important one. When I have a minus negative, because this negative stays there, but B is also a negative. So those negatives right next to each other, if there's a number in between them, this rule doesn't apply. But if there's two negatives right next to each other, okay, the only reason why there's parentheses here is because that negative is with the 2, but if it's a minus negative, you'd end up with a positive. So when we're solving, we want to isolate the letter, get it by itself, all right? But I can't isolate the letter and just do whatever I want, because then I lose the value. So if I'm doing y minus 8 equals 24, I have to get rid of all its friends. And whose friends? I'm talking about the variable, which is y. So y, okay, we want to get by itself, but there's a negative 8 attached to it. How do I get rid of a negative 8? Well, just like we learned here, the opposite, okay, of a negative 8 would be a positive 8. So a positive 8 would get rid of this, okay, and I end up with just y on this side, which is exactly what we want. The problem is, if I leave it at that y equals 24, then I've changed the value of the equation. So in order to keep it balanced, equation is all about balancing, what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So chant it. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. All right? So what this means is if I add 8 to this side, I can do that in order to isolate, but that means I have to put the 8 somewhere. It can't just disappear. So I'm going to also add 8 to the other side. What I mean is to one side of the equal sign, I have to do to the other. So I'm not talking about giving the 8 to all of them, just to the other side of the equal sign. So then I have 24 plus 8, which gives me 32. Okay? What this means is if I put 32 in for y, I should get 24. I'm working backwards from the expressions that you're used to. All right? Number 5 is the same thing. I have 4.2 equals t plus 1.8. Now, the variable's on a different side, but the concept's still the same. I want to isolate the variable by getting rid of all its friends. Well, our variable is t, and its friends is positive 1.8. Okay? So in order to get rid of the friend, positive 1.8, I have to do the opposite of positive 1.8, which is negative 1.8. Okay? This cancels out, leaving me, see how I'm always bringing down the equal sign? Don't forget that equal sign. This gives me t on this side. Okay? And my chant, what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So if I did negative 1.8 to that side of the equal sign, I have to do it to this side. So 4.2 minus 1.8 gives me 2.4. And again, check your work, okay? If I'm not sure. So that means if I do 2.4 plus 1.8, if I plug this in back for t, it should give me a 4.2. If it doesn't, then I did something wrong. All right, the last one is fractions, but luckily these fractions are the same denominator, so we don't have to worry about finding common denominator. I have a negative 5 over 11, so in order to get rid of p stays the same. Sorry. I'm going to add 5 over 11, right? Because I do the opposite. So the opposite of negative 5 over 11 is positive negative 5 over 11. This cancels out, leaving me with just a positive p. It doesn't mean that this plus sign disappears. It just means that a positive p, I don't have to put a positive in front of it. I can, it means the same thing. But because it's by itself, I don't have to put the plus sign, okay? And so here's my chant. What I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So then I have to add 5 over 11. So this gives me negative 2 plus 5 all over 11. So negative 2 plus 5 gives me a positive 3 over 11. That gives me that. So that means if I plug it in, it should give me a negative 2 over 11. So a positive 3 over 11 does give me a negative 2 over 11 if I add it to negative 5 over 11. So go ahead and write this down. Don't forget your vocabulary. And try on your own, page 20, numbers 5, 11, and 19. Page 20, numbers 5, 11, and 19. And I will see you in class.